All right. We're having some technical difficulties today. Hello and welcome to FACT's webinar, Advanced Brooding, Honing In on Your Skills. Our guest presenter is Sam Noble. I'm Samantha Gasson, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating this session. Thank you for joining us. Before we dive right in, let me take a minute or two to do a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization that works to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers through our humane farming program, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods program, and generally help consumers make informed food choices. You can visit our website at foodanimalconcerns.org to learn more about all of our farmer services. And as always, I would like to thank my colleague, Catherine Hope, for helping out today. At this point, I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed presenter, Sam Noble. Sam comes from a long line of farmers in Minnesota and brings just over 10 years of experience with raising poultry, both in industrial confinement and pasture-based operations. She spent her younger years raising and showing livestock in 4-H and earned a BS in animal science with a minor in sustainability from Iowa State University. And she told me to say, go Cyclones. In 2021, Sam moved to Central Arkansas, where she now manages the pastured poultry enterprises at Heifer Ranch for Heifer USA. She oversees various types of poultry, including brooders, broilers, turkeys, layers, and ducks. And for the past 10 years, Sam has specialized in brooding and other essential aspects of poultry production. At Heifer USA, she also creates educational YouTube content aimed at educating farmers about pastured poultry. Additionally, Sam leads pastured poultry-related research and development initiatives and product testing to improve management and welfare practices in the field, as well as farmer work-life balance. Her mission is to advance sustainable pasture-based poultry farming using regenerative farming practices to create a more accessible and ethical food system for farmers and communities. So we are very lucky to have Sam with us today. I first met Sam at the APA conference last year, not last year, in January. And I think I pushed my way through the crowd because there were so many people asking her questions to ask her to do a webinar with us. And she didn't take a lot of convincing. She was perfectly up for it. So it was great. And so we're very lucky to have you today with us, Sam. I feel like there's just going to be a lot shared today that will be very useful if my experience at your talk at APA tells me anything. So anyway, I am going to go ahead and let you start your presentation.
Cool. All right, let me get back to this. And okay, does that look all right to you, Samantha?
It looks perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I'm pretty excited to be here and share my presentation with you and everybody else here. So this is advanced brooding. I imagine most of you kind of generally already know what you're doing. There's a lot of content on YouTube and online about like the basics of brooding and what you need to get a chick from, from day one all the way through their life cycle. So we just kind of want to, dive in a little bit deeper into, what you guys most likely already know, just to perfect and increase your knowledge on that sort of stuff. So a little
Sam,
bit.
you had a poll. Did you want to just let me know when you want that run? And
Oh yeah,
have to do
yeah.
it same as.
You can start it now is good. That's good with me. So yeah, a little bit about where I currently work. We in Heifer. Let me just get that out of there. Okay, so at Heifer, we work currently in about 19 countries. We also work in the US. So we have a physical location in Arkansas, located in a tiny, tiny town of Perryville, Arkansas. And so we raise broilers, layers, turkeys, and occasionally ducks. We also have a grass-fed cow-calf operation, as well as woodlot pigs and grass-fed sheep. So that's kind of what we do here. Basically, we do a lot of research and development initiatives and kind of a physical location where people can come to tour and learn and ask a lot of questions if they need. So basically, we do it in practice as well as, educate people. now I'm back to, there we go. So our mission is to end hunger and poverty while caring for the earth. If you've heard of Heifer International, most likely you've heard of us donating, a cow in a foreign country. That's sort of the type of monetary donations that we receive from that side of things. But here at Heifer Ranch and Heifer USA, where our physical location takes place in the US, we focus a lot on farmer education, farmer outreach and support. We work with livestock processing. We partner with Cypress Valley Meats and Natural State Processing. So basically, what that results in is market development, and we kind of help to, increase or decrease the bottlenecks that a lot of people might face when they're raising livestock. So that's kind of what we do. So just a bit of an overview, what we'll be covering today. I will touch a little bit on the brooding basics just to kind of catch a lot of people up to speed. And a little bit about like what your house should look like, your brooder environment should look like, the nutrition and health of them from, when they're in the brooding phase, and increasing your ability to manage. And then we'll have time, about 15 minutes for questions at the end. So the brooding basics, a lot of people who have, a larger flock will have a barn or a shed or something that they brood in. When you're smaller, a lot of that looks like water tanks and that sort of thing for people. We do a little bit of everything here. We have a bigger barn, we have a smaller barn, and we also do layers in our water tanks. So basically the basics of what you need is the bedding, the heat and insulation. Insulation is really going to kind of be a game changer if you're not able to keep your barn heated enough, especially when it's colder out. Then you're going to want to insulate that. You're going to want to have, and we'll touch base on this stuff too, like later on, we'll go in a little bit more details as we go. Lighting, feed, water, air, and obviously welfare, kind of the basics. So, and then here I've got the age range. So for broilers, they're going to be, which is the meat birds. If you guys aren't aware what a brooder actually is, it's where the baby bird, you're going to be raising it, until they're, a little bit older, a little bit more grown to be on the pasture, which is what we do here. We do pasture-based operations. And so broilers typically are in the brooding phase from day 1 up until day 21. So about 3 weeks of age. So these are just kind of like target temperatures to aim for at different ages. And these aren't necessarily like where everywhere it needs to be. So this 92-degree temperature is going to be kind of a little bit of their comfort zone. And same with the 91, the 88, the 74, the 55. That's going to be their comfort zone. So you can have that target of 92 degrees in a certain area of the barn, which is going to be around their feed and water areas where they're going to want to hang out and sleep and stuff like that. The furthest away from where their heater is, you're going to want to be at minimum 88 degrees because they're not going to want to hang out anywhere that's going to be any cooler than that. And then for stocking density, when you're stocking your brooder, you're going to want to consider the square footage for when they're going to be the oldest. So you have at each week of life, there's going to be a quarter of a square foot added. So first week is going to be a quarter of a square foot. Second week is going to be half a square foot. Third week is going to be 3/4 of a square foot. And then so on. If you keep, for layers, you're going to be keeping them in the brooder a bit longer. So they might be closer to 5, 6, 7 weeks of age. So you're just going to keep adding a quarter of a square foot to that week of age. And same thing with turkeys. If you're raising turkeys, you're going to just keep adding a quarter of a square foot. So turkeys will be in the brooder for 5-6 weeks usually. So you just keep adding that quarter of a square foot is kind of how that math works out. So when you're fine tuning your brooder environment, you're going to want to set it up and turn on the heat at least 24 hours in advance. If you know that your brooder has a hard time heating up, I would set that up, turn the heat on 72 hours in advance, because you're going to have, you're going to want to heat the shavings themselves up, the bedding, as well as the floor beneath it, because anywhere that they're going to dig down is going to be colder. And if you're going to have fluctuations in heating throughout the day, say obviously it gets colder at night, you're going to want to make sure that, concrete or dirt floor or whatever you have underneath it is going to want to be heated up as well. Because the thing with chicks and baby birds, they feel their heat through their feet. So if you pick them up, you can literally just turn them over and feel the temperature on their feet. And if they feel cold to you, they're cold. So that's where their heat is going to be really, really low. So, so then again, we'll go into more detail about each of these things, but air temp, floor temp, you're going to want to make sure you really pay attention to that. Air quality and humidity. Spot brooding versus whole house brooding, we'll touch a little bit more on that as well, and kind of explain the differences and benefits of each. I don't like corners. I want to have everything rounded so that they're not, getting hung up in the corners. Whenever you have that kind of 90-degree angle, is going to be somewhere where they're going to walk, and they're just going to walk and not necessarily keep going around that corner. So we're going to want to eliminate corners as much as you can. For ventilation, you're going to want to make sure you have really adequate ventilation, and that's going to really help with your air quality and your humidity, and as well as a light schedule. And you're going to want to have biosecurity. So if you don't know what biosecurity is, that's how you avoid getting disease or viruses or anything like that into your birds. So that's going to be like changing boots, wearing gloves, using hand sanitizer, avoiding any sort of contamination from bringing them in.
We have a question, Sam, about how does humidity affect ambient temperature in the brooder?
So humidity, if it's too high, that will, sorry, there's somebody weed eating outside my office. I don't know if you guys can hear that. If there's too much humidity, if the humidity is too high, first off, your target is going to want to be like 30, 40, 50% is kind of, you're still in the good. If you have anything above 60% humidity, and especially, 70, 80, that's really going to be affecting your, not your litter quality, is going to be affecting your, how the brooder feels to the chick as well. So the main thing with humidity is that, at least in the brooding phase, it's going to be adding moisture to your bedding, is mostly my concern with humidity in the brooder. So that's kind of, we'll cover a little bit humidity on ventilation. So then some common things here for in the brooder that are, issues are piling, starve outs, and stress. So the causes is, for piling, a lot of times it's not always cut and dry. It's, a lot of people think that it's, oh, you're piling because they're too cold, or you're piling because they're too hot. And they're going to the corners. So it's not always cut and dry. There's drafts that you can have. The bedding could be cold. There could be corners, like I was talking about earlier. Sounds can be irritating to them and cause them to pile because they're just scared and stressed. Any obstacles, if you have obstacles, especially close to the walls and the chicks are walking through, they'll kind of tend to pile up there and instead of just keep walking around that obstacle and an unequal heat. So some solutions to that is to eliminate drafts, eliminate the obstacles and the sounds, and have adequate heat space. So especially if you're using Ohio brooders, which are the brooders that have kind of the box and they can go underneath it, and heat lamps and stuff like that, you're going to want to make sure that you increase your number and you have enough of that for the number of birds that you have. So then starve outs. So what I mean by starve out is when you receive your chicks, there's typically a percentage of them that just don't make it, right? So, and that's typically within the first 3 or 4 days. So a chick can live off of its yolk sac for the first 3 days of their life. That's how we're able to ship them through the mail. So chicks, by that 3rd day of life, will have absorbed their yolk sac into their intestine. So their yolk is physically still inside their body and attached to their intestine. And that is slowly feeding them and hydrating them, in their first 3 days of life. But by the time that's all used up, if they don't find that food and water in that time period, they're going to start to die off. So in those cases, if you are seeing a lot of mortality, around that 3rd, 4th, 5th day of life, you're going to want to take a look at, your feed space, your water space, and make sure that you're making slow changes if you do make changes to the environment. They need time to adjust, and not everything is cut and dry for them. They're not always just like, oh, well, I'll go to this other water or other food. If you're constantly moving stuff around to different places, they need time to adjust if you're going to be doing stuff like that. And stress, a lot of that is caused by transportation, obviously. That's going to be the biggest thing. Later on in life, it might be like sounds, anything that they're hearing. It could be food and water, them not being able to find it or them not having access to it, and temperature swings. So if you're having a big swing in temperature, that's going to be really stressful on them. So you're going to want to make sure that, especially if you're heating with heat lamps and you don't have a way to, automatically change the heat on that, then there's going to be swings if you're not, if you're not there present enough to make the adjustments. So I'll have a better, more broader picture of this, but this is the brooder that we have at Heifer Ranch. We brood about, currently we brood 2,400 in here. We do have space enough to do 4,000. It's not my favorite because that is a lot of chicks. So we brood broiler chicks in here. And this is just kind of some examples of what I was talking about with spot brooding. You can see that I've got cardboard dividers here, so I've got the cardboard wall sectioned off away from the concrete wall. And I also have a divider between groups. So I'll put, I have 4 rings like this that are cardboard rings. And so I'll divide the group into 4 groups. So they all each have their own little community. So if I'm, if I have, 1,000 in each of those groups, then the group on the far side may have piled up because something happened, the heater failed, I don't know, the window blew open or something. That group will be the only one affected, whereas the group next to them and the group further and further will have no idea what happened. So instead of 4,000 piling up, I got only 1,000 piling up. So that's kind of the benefits of spot brooding versus whole house brooding. And you can see here, I've got a couple different types of waters. I've got the 1 gallon water, I have a bell water, and I have these nibble waters. So I've got tons of water space and feed space. I've got the feed flats and the automated feed line there in the center that you see, and the green buckets. So just lots of different types of feed and lots of different feed space here. They're going to walk 13, 10 feet or something, and they're going to run into food or water. So just make everything really obvious for them to find. So, and then this is kind of a bit of a overview site map of this drawing of our brooders. So we've got the inlets, everything's basically even. So I've got the inlets, I've got the entry doors over here. Incoming water line, you can see my water lines here in the blue line, and then the center feed line, and I've got heaters evenly distributed throughout the barn. And same with the inlets, all of those are even. Everything should be basically equal, evenly, to make an even environment for them. So if you're getting to the point of increasing your batch sizes, some game changers you may want to look into, and this is not right for everybody, obviously, but something you may want to consider as you increase your numbers and your labor may be increasing. Your automation, feed, water, heat, ventilation, automated, it saves on labor. And again, this is not for everybody. You may want to, crunch the numbers, do the math. You can invest in environmental controllers. They help with monitoring daily temperatures when you're not able to be there. You can plug in a temperature schedule. You can control their ventilation, their light schedule, and it can indicate over and under use of equipment such as heaters. Is it really cold outside and you're over ventilating, so you're pulling out too much of that heat, or and your heaters are just constantly running because of that. So that is helpful feedback for you to know, are you wasting fuel or electricity if you are using heat lamps and that sort of stuff. And as well as litter management is another key thing as you increase your sizes. So more birds typically mean more litter use. So you may want to look into, stirring up that bedding, once or twice a week. So tilling it, turning it over, or whatever. The air circulation, make sure you have good ventilation. So in order to prevent yourself from just top dressing with bedding over and over, you may want to just look into ways of just improving the current bedding that you have, to save money on adding more. When you do not want to do that if you have mold, for example. If you're finding mold, or that gray powdery kind of looking stuff, or if it's wet, then in that instance you do want to top dress, because that can affect health. So, and then if you are at the point where you are really increasing your numbers, do you want to look into, bulk bedding or feed too? That's typically when you're at a really large scale, though. Most people, it makes more sense to have feed bags and bags of bedding. We personally still use bags of bedding, but we go through quite a bit. So it may be more beneficial for us in the near future to switch to bulk bedding. And we currently use feed in bulk. So, and then another thing, when you're increasing your numbers and you're going to want to increase your management, you're going to want to check on them frequently. So, and don't just, peek in the door and look at them and go away like, oh, they're fine, I think, and shut the door. You're going to want to go in there multiple times a day, especially when they're first here. You're going to want to check on them, go around, clap, get them all up and moving. And that will encourage them to go drink and eat as well. So they'll wake up from their nap, they'll go find that food and water that they really need to find, especially in the first, week of their life. Do that several times a day, because that will increase their chance of survival. And then record keeping, I really, really, really like records. So, whether it be like, something you scratch on a notebook paper, or you have an Excel sheet that you record every day, mortality, anything that you did in the brooder, feed consumption, was there a water spill? What happened that day? That, did you have an increase in mortality? What was going on that day? Take that as a lesson learned. So you'll be able to look back. And you'll be able to determine your livability and some other important things. So another thing to look for is power outages. So do you have a protocol? Do you have an idea of what you could do if there is a power outage when you don't have power to ventilate your brooder or heat? So do you have a generator as a backup, or do you have something as a backup to like a plan in place to accommodate those birds? Are they old enough to survive without the heat? Sometimes yes. So then the next step I would say is you need to do something with your ventilation then, because your ventilation, if you don't have ventilation for a period of time, you can actually suffocate the birds when you're at a certain, age, especially. And then vitamins and electrolytes, I really like to use them. They really help with their energy, especially in times of periods of stress. So when we first get them, they're on vitamins and electrolytes in the first 3 days. I wouldn't do it more than, 3 times a week if you need it. If you don't need it, then save money, obviously. But I like to use it in periods of stress. I use it also before they move to pasture, just to kind of get them, limped along a little bit and just give them that little bit of boost. So here's
Sam,
some
can I
examples.
quickly
Yes.
interrupt?
Yeah.
As far as what kinds of vitamins and are you giving them? Is it a pack that you're buying, or what are you
Yes.
giving them?
So the vitamins that I give them is a pack. If you're dealing with a few, like just a few birds, you just want to, use like the 1 gallon of water. There's mixtures that you can buy from Tractor Supply and that sort of stuff. They're just like a little water additive. They have electrolyte packs, they have probiotic packs, and I think vitamin packs. Usually what the key thing for vitamins in them is like vitamin D, which can be, a game changer for rickets and calcium. If you're having that nutrient deficiency, you're finding deficiencies because of feed, that's going to be another one, or a reason that you're going to want to use that vitamin pack. So yeah, so every time I get, so you can kind of see like in the picture on the left, it's their water is a little bit orangey. There's a pack in there of just that extra electrolytes and stuff to help get them on the right start. So I'm going to imagine at some point, most of you either are currently raising your birds in a cattle water trough or something similar. This is kind of what my setup looks like when we get just a few layers. Just we have that, little chick feeder and chick water, and we have a heat lamp. And it's just kind of open air. In those instances, you typically you need to worry about ventilation or anything like that, unless you may want like a little bit of circulation because it's getting kind of humid in there and you're having that packed bedding. This picture on the right is our turkey brooder, where we kind of outgrew a water trough for our turkey numbers. So in there, it's kind of a shed. where they have that, I think it was like a 12 by 12 room, and then it opened up as they get older to another 12 by 12 room, just some expanded space as they got older. And then ultimately they expanded out into another day range area too during the daytime. So we have, again, you can just see like the extra feed we've got here, and we actually transitioned to automatic water. So there's just a hose of water coming in here, and it feeds into this water line with cups. Um, so, and then this is an overview picture of our chick brooder. In this picture, we have about 4,000. So this kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at for spot brooding. We have radiant heaters, so LP gas, and then we've got the automatic feed line with an auger and a hopper you see in the back where feed comes in, and then you can see in the corner we have the bags of shavings, just as extra in case we need them. So lots of feed and water space, and everything should be about evenly distributed in terms of equipment. So for the feed, just to kind of give you an idea for bulk of what we do at the ranch, we have these 3 tanks for poultry. We get a truck comes, 21, it'll hold 21 tons, and he'll drop off each of the different types of feed of poultry feed into this. So you can see they've got different labels. So the middle one, where you see the white pipe coming out of that feed line, is the one that is directly fed into the brooder. So, and you can ignore my, I found a 4-leaf clover that day, so I was excited. So that was the only picture I've got of these tanks, but, and these other 2 outside feeds are, the left one is broiler 2, so our broiler grower. The middle one is broiler starter, as I said. And that's the starters for their time in the brooder. And the outside one is for turkeys. So both of the outside tanks, we can bring a grain cart and park it underneath this auger system that you see coming out of the sides of both of them. And then we can turn on that motor with a switch, and it'll directly pour feed into our grain cart. And we can drive that down to the pasture, just for an example. These are some ways that you can create automation in your brooder fairly inexpensively, without breaking the bank. The one on the left is for lights. So you can set this timer to have your lights on for certain times of the day. So say you want your lights on for 16 hours of the day, you could set that time, what time you want it to come on, what time you want it to turn off, give them that break in the middle. Have that period of darkness. And then the one on the right can operate exhaust fans if you have exhaust fans or circulation fans. So say you want it set to come on at a certain temperature, you can adjust that from this dial here. These, for, I would say a lot of you may break the bank. These I like because they're environmental controllers, and they talk, all the equipment talks to it. So the one on the left is going to probably be the cheapest of all the environmental controllers. So we have one of these for our turkey brooder. It operates, off of a schedule. So light schedule, heating schedule, or temperature schedule, ventilation. I tell it everything what to do. I program it, I tell it what to do. It has a history log too, and it, has alarms. So I know what's going on in the brooder, and it will tell me what's going on when I'm not there, and it'll operate independently without me being there. The one on the right is probably going to be the most expensive one you've ever seen. It's touchscreen, and it's way more than probably 95% of people will ever need. But it is, just an option as something that, just to kind of show you guys where that technology is for some brooders. So, for ventilation and air quality, there's natural ventilation, which is kind of the open air with, sometimes there you have circulation fans just to kind of stir that air up. Power ventilation, sidewalls, that are working in conjunction with inlets and exhaust fans to create a negative pressure. So the inlets and the exhaust fans, you're kind of manipulating to pull, those inlets will open, the exhaust fans will pull that air out. So you're gonna want to monitor your CO2 and your ammonia and your CO and a static pressure. So this is just a table here to kind of show you guys the minimum ventilation needs of each of these, at each week of life. So for the for monitoring, I like these 2 meters. The one on the left, I believe, is about $100 on Amazon. I could be wrong. But I like it because it tells you the CO2, which is going to be what your birds are breathing out. And it's going to also tell you, if you have a brooder like ours and you're using radiant heat, basically ball of flame, you're burning up oxygen. So that's going to tell you your ambient temperature, your humidity, and your CO2. So with your CO2, you never want to go above 3,000 for parts per million for CO2. Good, you're in the clear if you have anything less than that. Again, humidity 60% or higher is not good. Sometimes, obviously, with the outside temperature or with the outside humidity, you're not able to manipulate that. And the meter on the right, you can find lots of these everywhere, even at hardware stores. The infrared temperature laser gun, that's going to tell you the temperature of your shavings. So I use these meters to help me make a decision on any changes that I need to make in the environment. So is my humidity too high? Well, I need to increase my ventilation. Can I increase my ventilation? No, because my floor is too cold, that sort of stuff. So that'll help you kind of have like that decision matrix and use those decisions, use your data that you're collecting with these to make decisions on environmental stuff. So that power ventilation that I was talking about, you're going to want to evacuate that CO2, that CO, ammonia, and humidity out of the brooder that's being produced in the brooder. So that's bad, creates poor health and poor growth. You're going to want to be pulling in that fresh air using that negative pressure, like I said. So your target, if you are measuring the static pressure, is going to want to be a 0.07 to a 0.1. Again, not many people do with that sort of thing. But easy way you can do it is your door a vacuum as you're pulling it in? Then you may want to adjust probably have too much air pull. So again, circulation fans, I'm a huge proponent of that because it stirs the air. It also stirs the heat. So if you want to save on your heating and create a more even environment, then air circulation is really great. Obviously, you're not going to want to be just dumping air on chicks especially when they're little. So you're going to want to make sure it's not too drafty from that sort of stuff. So, and this is just kind of a picture I put together of what that power ventilation kind of looks like in the brooder. You have your air coming in here from the left side of the inlets, and that's the blue. Then you have it rising up high into the ceiling. You have these circulation fans is what I have here. They're called hemisphere fans. There are mixing, circulating the air. And then on the left side, you can kind of see it's pulling that now warm air downwards to where the birds are and exhausting out. So inlets high, throw that air up. Exhaust fans pull that air down and out. So your CO2, ammonia, humidity, and CO, is everything that you're going to want to control in there and exhaust. So same thing with lighting. As ventilation, you're going to want to make sure everything's evenly distributed, that there's no dark or shadowy areas, because otherwise they'll sit in those darker areas day 1 through 3. I prefer to have, full 24 hours of light. Some people will add just one hour of darkness in those first 3 days. I wouldn't do any more than that. So in that case, it would be 23 hours, 23 hours, 23 hours. And then as they get older, add 1 hour of additional darkness every other day. So if you're starting at 24, go to 23 at 4 days old, then go to, at 6 days old, and then on up. Just keep adding an additional darkness until that matches the sunrise and the sunset times, so that they can adjust to the lighting and when they're on the pasture. And then I'm just going to lightly touch base on this. I'm not a nutritionist, so basically these are what your nutritional requirements are for chicks, and their mineral requirements. This is just kind of the basics of a starter feed. I stole this from Jeff Maddox, if any of you know him. So he's the nutritionist, he's the professional. The main thing that I look at when I'm looking at feeds is that protein percentage. So that's gonna, tell you which you want to go with. So for starter feed. So starter feed is going to be for broilers, their first 3 weeks of life. For turkeys, it's going to be 5 or 6 weeks. For layers, I'm not 100% sure. I think it's definitely longer, because you kind of have that starter feed, and then you kind of move on to a holder feed, and then you move on to a layer feed once they start actually producing feed or eggs. So just some considerations for your feed. Health issues, you're going to be facing dehydration, ascites, or you could be facing some common things are dehydration, ascites, E. coli, mold infection, rickets. Dehydration is, when you're looking for those starve outs, that's going to be, they're going to look dry, like they have dry skin. If you peel back that skin over their breast muscle, you're going to see it's a little bit darker, purpley brown, kind of reddish looking, compared to the healthier ones. If you look at them, look at healthy ones and look at the weaker ones, you're going to be able to tell the differences of them. Ascites, or round heart, or water belly, a lot of people call, is an issue with ventilation. So that dilated ventricular wall, when you're looking at their heart should be shaped kind of like this, like it's a muscle. It should be really muscly and firm, but when they have that round heart, it's going to be really floppy. So you're going to kind of, wiggle it around. It's going to be a little bit jello-y. And you're also going to see fluid in the belly. E. coli, that's usually a lot of fibrin. So like that white cheesy stuff, if you open it up, can be around their abdomen mainly. Mold infection, they're little perfect circular balls that are either in the trachea, the lungs, or the air sacs. And rickets, which I briefly talked about earlier when we were talking about vitamins. It's it's going to be a deficiency. So your feed is not adequate for them, or they're not eating enough of the feed, for example. So they're going to have difficulty walking. They're going to be the wing walkers that you see, the bruising around the wings and stuff like that, if they're, trying to get around by pushing themselves with their wings. And then also just, make sure your management is up to par, and biosecurity can leave birds just really susceptible to infections. So especially when they're in that brooding phase. So we just really want to make sure that they have full access to feed, and you have good rodent control, especially to make sure you don't have mice or cats or anything like that is getting into your brooder that can be bringing an outside disease in. And so then here's some solutions, which I already touched base on a little bit on each of these. So just make sure for dehydration, obviously just equal water space, just have lots, and then when you do have issues, especially in the beginning, I will create a hospital box, especially ones that are weaker and they're not walking very well. I just, open up that hospital box into one big pen, that delivery box, and just give them that littler space. So, and they can, walk a little bit easier in here. They don't have to walk as far to the food and water, and you can pay more attention to them. So then transporting them to the pasture. So everything you've done up until this point is preparing them for pasture. So you're decreasing their temperature, you're getting them used to that outside temperature, not so reliant on heat. They're going to be just very prepared to be outside. So when we transport birds out to the pasture, we create them up into a smaller pen. So we'll take like shavings bags and kind of shake them and corral them into a smaller catching pen. So I'll kind of show you this overview too. So this yellow here that you see here that says yellow crate pen, we bring the birds, we shoo them all into this, little yellow pen area so that we can have more control on them. And then we divide them into sections again and catch each bird, put them in the crate. So we put 10 birds in each of these green crates that you see, just to kind of be efficient. We have slow, controlled movements. We don't want to be chasing the birds around. That can injure them, that can injure us, and it just takes a lot more time. So we put them in a smaller controlled group, and we make sure we have slower controlled movements. We don't want any jumping, any flapping. You're going to have a little bit of that, but we just try to minimize it as much as we can. So then, yeah, so there's that pen. For my turkeys, and I know some people do this for chickens, they transport them with a trailer. So you can see here that I've raced up any of the obstacles for the path that we're going to be walking the birds up to the trailer. I've made kind of a funnel shape out of these plywood boards, and we just take, just the used shavings bags again. They're empty, and we just kind of shake and encourage them to walk up onto the trailer there. So you can see we have a ramp there as well. We just try to make everything as smooth as we can, just bring them all into small groups. You can't corral chickens or turkeys or whatever you're raising all at once. So they're not like cattle or anything like that. You can't just push them all at once. You got to have small controlled groups. So I would say like groups of 20 to 50. You're going to want to, push together and encourage them to walk together in a group. So you're going to want to obviously make sure that you're also monitoring the corners if you're doing that. Make sure there's not any piling going on behind you, where you may lose some before, because definitely happen to me if we're not paying attention enough. So, um, and then just kind of a shameless plug, I guess, for if you've heard of our YouTube channel, you can also come visit the ranch, as I said before. We've we do tours on occasion, upon request, obviously. And then we also have a lot of informational videos out there on YouTube. So yeah, awesome. I think that's about it. So we
All
went a little
right.
time. Sorry about
It
that.
was really good seeing this for this seeing your presentation for the second time as well.
Yeah,
So it's
good.
very good. I'm going to go ahead and launch our end of webinar poll. If you guys wouldn't mind filling this out, it really just does help us get funding for all of these webinars. They're free, and so yeah, if you want to, everybody. Let's just leave this slide up for a few minutes, if you don't mind, Sam, so anybody who wants
Yeah.
to get the QR code can get that. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started with the questions. So the first question is Vanessa, who has a cargo, I'm assuming it's a cargo container. She said storage container. So I'm assuming it's like, a 20 or 40-foot long
Right.
container, shipping container. So she's brooding in. She has two fans to push in air in and out. And then she has two windows that they're placed in. And so she wants some suggestions on how to correct she sees water droplets on the walls because it's so cold outside and I guess warm inside. So how would you suggest she correct that?
Okay, so if you're having water droplets, I would say you have too high of humidity in there. So you're not bringing in enough air / pulling out enough air. Because the more air in and out that you have, that's going to be drying up your brooder a bit more. So I'm going to guess you also may have, your little bit moisture in your bedding also, and it's your bedding may be a little bit difficult to manage. So increasing that ventilation will help a lot. As you increase the ventilation, your heat usage will increase as well. So in your case, that's a good thing because you don't want that sort of moisture in there. So you're going to want to make sure that you have enough of that air exchange. So you may want to just look into, you know, trial and error obviously is a big thing. So everything that I've learned is just trial and error. So just trial and error, play around with it. Does this work? Does this not work? Does this increase? Is this too much? Is this too little? Does this solve the problem? So just trial and error of that sort of stuff. So yeah.
All right, thank you.
Are there different brooder needs for broilers versus layers?
So I would say mostly, for the most part, no. In the first few weeks of life. But in terms of for layers, like I was saying, you're gonna have them in the brooder for longer. And for layers, you typically have a little bit more space requirements because they're gonna be in the brooder for longer. So you're gonna wanna also take that into consideration when you raise layers, that they need that extra space. And they're a little bit crazier and jumpy than broilers.
They are. And then somebody asked, can you brood them together? So, and I'm assuming that's layers and broilers. I think that's what the question is.
Okay, so
Yes, layers and
yeah,
broilers.
I mean you can, but you'd also again need to consider that the layers, they're going to be slower growing than the broilers. So the layers are going to be they're going to feather out a little bit faster than the broilers will, but they'll be a lot slower growing, so they need a little bit extra time. So if you are raising them together, you're at some point when you move them to pasture, you're going to need to divide them up.
And then back when you showed your barn, you had how you sort of position them or your little squares. Theodore would like to know what's the square feet of those, each of those.
Let me see if I can back up.
It was back towards the beginning.
Well, here, I'll guess. Is he referring to the cardboard rings, I would guess?
Yes, I think so. I think it was that slide.
So the rings, I'm not exactly sure of the dimensions of it, but I would say, so my brooder or our brooder here at the ranch is a 30 by 100 foot long. So I mean, and we divided them to 4 rings, so they can be rather large. You could do 12 by 12. So another key point for if you're using the radiant stoves like we do, for every 1 foot high that heater is, it projects heat 2 feet out. So we have ours set up to about a little bit over my head, and I'm 5.5 feet tall. So that's going to project, 5 feet. If I do it 5 foot up, then that's going to project 10 feet out. So that will tell you how big your rings are going to be too. So I actually have my heaters quite a bit higher than I would say most people do, because I want it to project out pretty far. So that will tell you, you can have your rings quite large.
We've got a couple of questions about nutrition. Do you ever give them apple cider vinegar as a supplement? And then what about feeding them fermented feed?
The apple cider vinegar I have not used in the brooder. In the past, we have used it in the pasture. But I would say for the most part, what people are wanting to achieve with the apple cider vinegar, I actually feel that the vitamins and electrolytes are going to be a lot more effective than apple cider vinegar is. And sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Fermented feed.
Fermented feed, right. So I know people do have a lot of success with fermented feed. Here we haven't, just because of the sheer amount of birds that we have, it would increase our labor of mixing that feed just astronomically. So we have so many chicks and so much feed that we use about 3 tons of feed for that, for their first 3 weeks of life. And that would be a lot of feed for us to ferment. So we do not personally, but.
I have a friend who has a concrete mixer, and he doesn't do it for, I don't think he does it for in the brooder. I think he just does it for when they're out on pasture. And he ferments his feed, and he's feeding, like 500
Wow.
batches of 500 at a time. I think he's crazy. I
Yeah.
mean, I think you have to be young and strong to be able to do that, because you know how heavy that would be.
Yeah.
Anyway, he uses a concrete mixer. He said he's getting higher yields on his birds. They're growing faster. I don't know.
Yeah, I have seen people who do it with this like smaller number of birds, and they say they do have a lot of success with it. So
Yeah, I think it's a step too far for me. I'm not going to do it. But he
yeah.
loves it. He does it. He's a chef. Maybe that's why he likes to do it. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
That's to fiddle with stuff. Anyway, Joseph wants to know, what kind of water cup do you use for your turkeys? He's had issues with them not using them.
So our turkeys, let me see if I can back up to, oh, here, hold on. So this is a cup. It's a little bit of like a bowl. It's probably just like this wide. Ziggity makes it. Zigggy, I believe is how they're spelled. They have a website. They can direct you to a supplier in your area, because you can't unfortunately directly order from them. But they also make a lot of like nipple lines and that sort of stuff. So if you have a poultry supplier, typically they are able to get this Ziggity. So this is I can't remember if it's the T Max or the D Max. It's one of the two. One is an adult sized bowl, and one is a smaller sized bowl. So turkeys, they just need that more visible, and they need something to see in order to drink. So a little bit difficult in that sense.
All right. He said what he was using was one with the push knobs, that they have to actually push in. And I guess
Okay.
that's what he was having trouble with. So maybe just having a cup rather.
Turkeys aren't good for that sort of stuff, unfortunately.
I know. They're big babies.
Yeah.
All right.
Why do chicks need so much light in the beginning? You were saying you're giving them 24 hours of light at the start.
So they need that extra time with that light in order to have extra time to find their food and water. So it's so important in the first week of life that they find that food and water consistently. So having that 23 hours or 24 hours in the first 3 days is really going to help them, give them time to find that food and water consistently enough so that they're not dehydrated and starving essentially.
All right, and then I've just noticed we're past 3 o'clock. Well, if it's okay, Sam, do you mind going to about 10 after? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's okay with me if people want to hang on.
All right. So I'm gonna ask the next question, which actually I just got chicks last week, and for the first time ever, I've never had this problem before. They had Gus is asking, how do you combat manure clumping on the chicks' backside, aka mud butt? We call it poop butt, but and I'd never had that happen before, and it was like they came that way, and now it's gone. And we didn't lose a bunch of birds or anything. They just had like really loose stools and it just clumped. How do you deal with that? Have you ever experienced it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people call it also like pasty butt. I
Pasty
see
butt, yeah.
that term a lot on the Facebook groups. Typically it is actually something intestinally going on with them. And if they do have that buildup, and so then they're not able to poop correctly and they kind of, have that up on around their butt, their vent is where they, poop out of. And so if they have buildup, sometimes that can kind of be caked up on their butt and then just preventing them from, pooping out more. But typically it's something going on intestinally. Just make sure that they have a lot of water, that they, they're not actually being dehydrated or, having issues with, their ability to digest and poop correctly. And some people will wash them off and stuff like that so that they can keep pooping. So
Yeah, I think that was the problem we had. And like I said, I've never seen it. I've been brooding birds for 30 years. I'd never seen it until, and they were young. They came with it. And then it lasted for like 3 days. They didn't die. And now they're better. But I did. I went around, I mean, 200, 300 birds cleaning their butts.
Yeah, yeah, that's not really effective. Sit there and wipe them. No.
Yeah. I listened to a book on tape or an audiobook while I was doing it. So it was fine.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Someone in the chat said that they combat it by adding grit.
Okay. So yeah. So back to that digestion too. If they're not, if their food's not breaking down appropriately and they're not able to absorb it appropriately, that grit will help their food break down even further. So, yeah, could probably help in a lot of situations.
We have a couple questions about bedding. Sam, did you have something to follow up about? Okay.
No, I forgot whose turn it was. And so I was going to ask the bedding question. So okay. Good for you. It was exactly where I was going.
What's your preferred bedding materials and how often are you laying down new bedding and how thick are you laying it?
So we use pine shavings. So we use a blend that has both bigger shaving pieces, smaller particles. So a good mixture of that is I prefer because the smaller flakes can help with absorption and the bigger flakes will help keep the dust levels down. So we have such a large brooder at the ranch, with all that ventilation and air movement in such a big space, if we had, a lot of finer pieces, it could get dusty in there. So for us, I don't like the peat moss because of that. The peat moss gets, in a lot of stuff, it gets the waters dirty and but if you're brooding in a lot smaller area, peat moss may be the answer for you. Peat moss has, it's really absorptive. And people use or straw, I don't find that to be very helpful with absorption. so for any moisture. But with the pine shavings, they they're really good at absorption and keeping that dust level down. So for the amount we use, I would say it's thick enough that I can, have my 4 fingers like this. And so it's about that thick when I first lay it down, and not everywhere. It's not super evenly spread out. Some areas are a little bit thinner, some areas a little bit thicker. But that's kind of what my base, you know, target is to have it about this thick. And then we are actually, unless we have a water spill, because we are able to manage our ventilation so well with that, fresh air exchange and circulation, we actually don't add shavings. Because, so if you are having to add shavings, you may want to look for, is your water leaking? Are your waters at the appropriate level? If they're too low, that can also, cause some extra water waste on the ground. And if you don't have enough, of that airflow and air circulation, and if your heaters aren't running enough to help dry up that can also contribute to needing to add more shavings on top. And another thing would be, do you have too many birds in there? So if you have too high of a density of birds in there per square foot, then you're gonna, obviously have more poop to cover and more moisture to deal with in your shavings.
Let's just ask one more question because we're at 3:09. So we've got a couple of questions about heaters, what you use for heating, and then somebody wanted to know Shelley wanted to know what's your opinion on heating plates?
Heating plates, which I'm assuming are the feed or the flat ones, I'm assuming. Personally, I use them in my house. I really like them because they're a little bit safer than heat lamps, and they're right down close to the level. They can go under there. It mimics a mother bird. They can go underneath it, get warmed up, run out, go eat. They can go back underneath it. Or what we have at the ranch, we have heat stove. So the radiant heat stoves, it's basically kind of like a dome like this, and there's a flame here. So that's going to be the projection of heat. So I prefer, if you have, a large enough brooder to do it, I prefer, radiant heat with that fire, essentially, because it's going to be something that heats the air and the environment, the shavings, everything, the whole surrounding, versus the heat lamp is just going to be kind of projecting that heat and only warming that one spot. It doesn't really project heat out as well as a radiant heat stove does.
Well, thank you, Sam. I have a couple of housekeeping items to share before we sign off today. A recording of this webinar and the slides will be available hopefully by tomorrow morning, maybe even this afternoon, not quite sure yet. These documents will be archived on our website and I will email them to you as well. We also have some other good webinars coming up, just three more, one each for the next few weeks. And I'll send you links to that as well and description so you can check them out. Sincere thank you to Sam. I'm so excited you let me convince you, which I didn't really have to convince you.
Twisted my arm.
you were okay with it. I would suggest to anybody if you want to watch the recording because there was so much information in there, and I was taking pictures of I was taking screenshots the whole time. So anyway, but thank you so much to everybody out there. You guys always have such great questions, and yeah, stay in touch, and we'll see all of you guys soon. Bye for now.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.